Wow, I don't think I've ever received applause behind this podium before I've even said anything. I feel like this is a good crowd. Welcome, everyone. I'm Scott Rothkopf, the Senior Deputy Director, and Nancy and Steve Crown Family Chief Curator at the Whitney Museum of American Art. Welcome to those of you who are watching us, the millions of viewers at home live streaming this. We're delighted to have you with us tonight at the Whitney to celebrate and honor our Bucksbaum Award laureate, Tiona Nekkia McClodden, who won the Bucksbaum Prize during the 2019 Biennial. As I think many of you know, the Bucksbaum Award was inaugurated in 2000 by our dearly departed and much loved Melva Bucksbaum with the Martin Bucksbaum Family Foundation. Melva was a very wonderful inspiration to all of us, a trustee of this museum who loved this museum so much, but even more than this museum, she loved artists and living artists, challenging artists. I know she would have loved Tiona, but she's here with us in spirit, as are a number of her family members and friends, and we're delighted that you're here for this award program. You'll see what I mean when we get to that, that Tiona has devised. But before we get to that, I want to say a word about the Bucksbaum Award. It's not a best in show. We're very clear about that. And I'll read to you something from the sort of statement about the award that the jurors have to consider before they give it to one of the artists in the biennial. It should be bestowed to, quote, an artist whose work demonstrates a singular combination of talent and imagination, a person who has made or promises to make significant contributions to the visual arts in the United States. And I think Tiona is someone who fits really both those ideas, well, more than two of them, talent and imagination, as well as having done something significant and promises to do so much more. She has already been the recipient of the 2019 Guggenheim Fellowship in the Fine Arts. She was a Keith Haring Fellow in Art and Activism at Bard College. She won a 2017 Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation Award. And we are here really tonight to celebrate her remarkable contribution to the biennial, the multi-channel sculptural and video installation, I Prayed to the Wrong God for You. This was a piece that was one of my favorite pieces in the show for sure, one of the most moving. It took us on a kind of spiritual journey, a personal quest from Maine to Nigeria, to many places in both Tiona's life and mind. And I want to point out that she said something in an interview online on Art Forum. She said, there's nothing that the art world fears more than religion. And so there was something I feel that was very brave at this moment to make a piece that had to do with many important ideas about being alive in the world and being an activist, but also in other ways through a personal and spiritual lens. And it's something that I kept coming back to, partly because it was so long, it was kind of infinitely long the way that it played, that it gave so much to all of us, and it became a kind of spiritual, emotional center in this very intense and roiling exhibition. And I want to start by acknowledging the co-curators of the exhibition, Jane Panetta and Rue Hockley, who are here with us. We are now 1 year really after the opening of that show, and the more I look back on it, the more proud I am of the exhibition, of all the work that the artists did, and certain that it is a show that really has changed the way that many people think about art and the role of museums, and I'm sure we will continue that in our next biennial. Jane and Rue served on the jury alongside some very dedicated fellow jurors, Lumi Tan of The Kitchen, Renee Morales of the Perez Museum, and Ryan Dennis of Project Row House. As well, we had two of our own additional curators, David Breslin and Adrian Edwards. Adrian's here tonight. David Breslin was a juror who happens to be the co-curator of the next biennial with Adrian Edwards, who's here tonight. And we are now ready to welcome Tiona and her collaborators to the stage. But before I do, I will say that this evening was really organized by her with Megan Hoyer, and I want to acknowledge Megan also as having been a major contributor to the biennial. The programs around the last biennial I think were truly extraordinary, and she was a great partner with the curators and the artists on that show. So thank you, Megan, for having us all here tonight. So rather than doing a kind of standard artist talk, and nothing Tiona does is standard, she has invited two people whom she greatly admires and are real leaders in the field, Ladi'Sasha Jones and Oluremi Onabanjo. And more applause, go for it. Ladi'Sasha Jones is a writer and a curator based in Harlem and is the artist engagement manager for the Laundromat Project. And Oluremi is a curator and scholar of photography and the arts of Africa, and she has previously served as the director of exhibitions and collection at the Walter Collection. Both of them are very accomplished writers as well, so I will not read all the places where they've published their work, and you can hear from them yourselves. So it will begin first with Ladi'Sasha doing an overview of Tiona's work, and then Oluremi and Tiona will take to the stage and have a conversation. And we will not be having questions afterwards, but if you would like to have a kind of personal moment, you may do so, not in a group setting. So with that, I turn the floor over to Tiona McClodden, Ladi'Sasha Jones, Oluremi Onabanjo, and welcome you to the Whitney. Thanks so much.
Good evening again, everyone. Good evening. So I'm honored to take part in this program in celebration of my dear friend and collaborator, Tiona Nekkia McClodden. In this moment, or for this overture, I will share, and I'm excited to share, some seated connections I hold from witnessing her work over the years. From McClodden's work, I am learning about the sharpness of brevity, or the breaking of long form into movements, how to tell a story, how to unravel the mystery of a narrative and to conceptualize big works into sequential parts or scenes. While I dwell, myself, in the space of run-on sentences, ellipses, and colons, you are teaching me how to sharpen my thought process, how to say it plain, as some may say, or as my mother would tell me, just say what you mean. To this directive, this overture is shaped around a litany from McClodden's conception and employment of Black men to fact. More concretely, her commitments to a Black cultural aliveness that will be illustrated throughout this evening's conversation. 1. So much of McClodden's work is steeped in making questions around heritage and remembrance more precise. Hers is the work of repair, a practice that is long and slow, which is to say her work is filled with the politics of care that is not merely about popular sensations of wellness, but the will towards relational discourses and collaboration and familial parallelism. I am working with my family's epic, she shared, preluding to the large and ongoing body of work that is Be Alarmed, the Black Americana epic. This is a project that is arranged in 4 movements that traces a century of her family saga in the context of their labor and spirituality, just to name a few themes. It is also the project that introduced me to McClodden's disposition around breaking and stretching form, beginning her career with the documentary film practice that also involved music, video production, and short narrative works. Be Alarmed is what reframed the moving image as an object, or moving image as sculpture. Just as, with that project, objects are shaped and seen as extensions or artifacts of the moving image itself. This is an approach that continues today. As we reflect on the work that was presented during the 2019 Whitney Biennial, I prayed to the wrong God for you. In both works, objects are conceived and made by the artist, sometimes including documentation of the studio processes of learning and crafting, from chainmail, armor, a sewing box, and a shotgun, to a helmet, an axe, and a horse's saddle. These objects appear in the film works and may also be presented on their own, imbued with the roles of witness, signifier, or heirloom. This way of filmmaking illustrates a fluid movement between narrative, object, and image, engaging the folkloric and the ephemeratic properties of Black men to fact as it is reworked through play and ritual, inviting us to dig deep into the Black, into spirit, into self, rigor, fear, and the familial, faith and futurity seeking parity with faith or with the path, or with the past, or with the unmarked. 2, Tiona, I've learned that personal narrative is central for you and to you. It arrives in all the forms of your work across the visual arts, in your writing, and throughout your curatorial practice. I want to shape this engagement of Eastman's work with his brother, you said, in relation to your project around Julius Eastman at the kitchen. I want to fill in the blanks, to know who Julius was also as a brother, who he was as a younger sibling who excelled in a different art form, Jerry in jazz and Julius in the classical, how both brothers came together in the middle and showed up in each other's work. This is the approach of an artist curator, one who deeply considers subjectivity in regards to record making and record keeping. As documented in our conversations around that project, you shared that Black Mentifact challenges and informs what you think you are seeing. It undergirds life experience through the memories and oral histories that shape it. This understanding of Mentifact gives way to the devices that circulate within your work. The devices of story, memory, the archive, friendships, family, the mirror, and mirroring. I would also like to add love as a critical device. Love in relation to questions like, who loves Black folk? Who amongst us really loves us? Who sees us, can hold our nature both in the moments of quiet and in its nature and in our nature when it's abrasive or difficult? This is the measure, the matter that holds and rings shouts through the fray and murmurs of desire. This is what gleams through your commemorative works around figures like Eastman, Essex Hempfield, Brad Johnson, and Robert Mapplethorpe. And in your return to subculture moments like the Philly Bop or queer club and S&M cultures, you've placed your art and curatorial practices right alongside your research to lean into the shared mechanics that are shared between the three, the mechanics of generosity, integrity, and disruption. This shows up in how you made space for supporting the careers of Black queer artists for years through a self-sourced artist management program. These are not mere anecdotes, but have always been so much part of your work and the markings that you're committed to within the field. 3, McClodden's Black Mentifact is trying to get us to think through culture and opacity, coding and codification. We're documenting and reproducing the image or narrative as a form of abstraction in itself, but one that is pulling our visual engagement around abstraction towards a space of full presence, one where abstraction and truth are not antithetical. McClodden begins with that which is shared, our cultural commons, not in regards to access, but the matter, ideas and beliefs that may connect us, that molds all that we know to be true or real, and how we arrived at those knowings, those that we carry, those that are responsible for shaping the arches of our feet and the lumps in the backs of our heads. McClodden's works has shown that it is all personal, that it is all art and it is all beautiful. Her Black Mentifact is not didactic, but a vernacular. It surfaces the data of the interior, like an oil pull from the scalp or the teeth. It is the thread of the beloved. It is a refrain of lineage, home, arrival, prayer, and the head that so loudly shapes the work. It is atavism, or the ancestral form. It is the circularity of all that which came before and lingers on and on and on. My dearest Tiona, I am thankful for all of your beginnings, returns, offerings, and rigor. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the Whitney Museum staff, my curatorial colleague and dear friend, Ladi'Sasha Jones, for a fantastic introduction, and Tiona, as ever, I'm grateful for the chance to think with you and learn from your practice, spiritual, artistic, archival, political, all at once. So before I dive in, I'd like you all to permit me a minor deviation to set the tone, so to speak. I'll only play half a minute, because if I played this song in its entirety, it would exceed the allotted time I have for these opening remarks. And warning, I'm Nigerian, so you should know what's coming. So for those of you who are not immediately familiar with the piece, I just played an excerpt from Nigerian Afrobeat icon Fela Anikulapo Kuti's legendary 1976 record Zombie. A riotous track, it was first released by Coconut Records in Lagos and then distributed worldwide through their outpost in London that year. As you could hear, the polyrhythmic percussion and high-tempo elements of the piece are infectious, amplified intensively through the monumental corpus of his Africa 70 band, 70 for the 70 musicians. While I didn't play a section of the record with vocals, those that weather through past the 4-minute mark will decisively hear the incisive lambasting of Obasanjo's Nigerian state military. The marching band became zombies, with whom Fela was in continual conflict. The record was a veritable viral sensation, but when played continuously in the concert at Fela's shrine, with liberal political commentary from the musician himself, ultimately it incited serious consequences, deadly for some, notably Fela's own mother, Funmilayo Ransome Kuti. While acknowledging the political stakes of this song in a national context, I bring up Zombie to remind us of the decolonial and civil rights era of the 1960s and 70s as a rich space of production and exchange for artists in the African diaspora, as well as to offer a space to think about the making of diaspora in unexpected spaces. Indeed, as Robert Christgau has stated, Fela's Afrobeat is real fusion music. He states, if James Brown's stuff is Afro-American, Fela Kuti's is American-African. Indeed, in the late 60s, Fela's time in the United States, an encounter with the Black Power and Black arts movement is what propagated his political and musical experiments. In an interview with the New York Times in 1977, he stated, in the States, people think the Black Power movement drew inspiration from Africa. They don't realize they're the ones who've got it over there. While we were even ashamed to go around in national dress until we saw pictures of black people wearing dashikis on 125th Street. For me, thinking this way is useful, as it destabilizes linear notions of identity formation as mapped into African and American artistic production, in the process exposing a potent pathway of reciprocal resonance in what art historian Tobias Wolford has termed the feedback loop of African American modernism. That is, a resonant discursive loop that connects American art and African art, diasporic art production and its interpretation, identity production, and recognition. With Zombie here as an entry point, I'd like to offer 6 prompts, or a little bit around there, to inhabit the space of diaspora where Tiona Nekkia McClodden's practice operates, where Chronos and Kairos can spiral, where geographies across North America, South America, and Africa occupy interlocking frames, and where the roads of return and diversion might be crossed. And speaking of crossroads, I would be amiss to move on without acknowledging here the liminal Orisha, that is spiritual deity of thresholds, gateways, and crossroads himself, Eshu Elegbara. I'll offer a brief Oriki, praise poem here, as it's this very kind of indeterminacy which we are engaged, and when we consider the kinds of Yoruba cosmological and philosophical tenets embedded in McClodden's practice. Eshu turns right into wrong, wrong into right. When he's angry, he hits a stone until it bleeds. When he's angry, he sits on the skin of an ant. When he's angry, he weeps tears of blood. Eshu walked through the groundnuts farm. The tuft of his hair was just visible. If it had not been for his huge size, he would not be visible at all. Lying down, his head hits the roof. Standing up, he cannot look into the cooking pot. He throws a stone today and kills a bird yesterday. Talk about the collapse of space, scale, scope, and time. In describing the impetus for her 2019 Whitney Biennial work, I Prayed to the Wrong God for You, McClodden has said, "This work is my way of confronting one of the major tools of colonialism, forced on my lineage, enslaved Africans, Black Southerners. My first personal decolonization project is to decolonize the tool that was put into me without consent, working its way through my genealogy, European religion." It's here that it's important to note the significance of McClodden's spiritual identity. She is a Santera, initiated into Santeria Lucumi in May 2012. Paralleling Brazilian candomblé, Santeria Lucumi is an Afro-Cuban religious practice of Yoruba origins, which sustained in the wake of the massive rupture of Middle Passage and the multivalent traumas of the transatlantic slave trade. Indeed, Yoruba religious and expressive practice has had an especially deep and clearly legible impact on art histories and religions in the Americas. Equally, today, thousands of individuals living in West Africa identify as Yoruba and can be found throughout Benin, Ghana, Togo, and with a large concentration in southwestern Nigeria. If my name didn't tell you, I'm Yoruba. Yet these slippages and fissures in Yoruba identity between spirituality, space, and ethnicity are made more complicated when one considers one of the many legacies of the British colonial era in Nigeria, formerly from 1914 to 60, but starting truly from the mid-19th century. During this time, there was a penetrating propagation of Christianity within Nigeria, which completely transformed, and many would say decimated, the population's relationship to Yoruba religious practice. To give us a working vocabulary for what is to come, I'll say that the Yoruba pantheon consists of a supreme being, Oludumare, and a number of Orisha. They include Orunmila, the Orisha of wisdom, the oracular representation of Oludumare; Oya, the Orisha of wind, fertility, fire; Ibeji, the twins; Oshun, the Orisha of love, intimacy, wealth; Yemoja, mother, the Orisha of women and Ogun River; Shopona, the Orisha of smallpox; Ogun, of fire, iron, hunting, politics; and as referenced here in a work by McClodden, Shango, the Orisha of thunder and lightning, crossed with the Brazilian X. Oludumare and Orunmila are of particular importance when practitioners consult with Babalaos, literally fathers of mystery, and their oracles of Ifa. In dialogue with the work of Yoruba language and literature specialist Chief Wande Abimbola, anthropologist J.D.Y. Peel gives insight into how this works. Often the client begins by confiding their problem to the instrument of divination, typically in a whisper, so the Babalao cannot hear. The Baba makes introductory chants to particular Orisha, especially Oludumare and Orunmila. The divination is then done, typically by manipulating palm nuts, ekim, or casting a chain strung with half nuts, opele. Depending on the resultant patterns, the Babalao marks out 2 of 16 sequences or marks or signatures. This produces 256 possible combinations called odun, of which the 12 great or odu, those are made when the same sequence is doubled. The Babalao then recites the divination verses, eshe, attached to the odu which has been cast. The client then selects the essay considered relating to the situation in general terms. After this, specific questions, again whispered, about related contingencies are asked in the form requiring yes or no answers. These are derived through the manipulation of lots made of cowries for good and bone for bad, used in conjunction with more castings. As Peel notes, and I think important for us when we think about Tiona's work this evening, Ifa is a projective technique. The client actively contributes to the diagnosis. Therefore, the essential aspect of the Baba is not the psychological insight, but rather the technical expertise of having to memorize many essay and knowing the appropriate sacrifices and moves one makes going forward. With that knowledge in hand, I think it's useful for us to really consider the prolonged commitment McClodden sustains to intellectual, artistic, and religious processes and interior workings. A proto-articulation of I Prayed to the Wrong God for You is offered in what she calls the work's prologue, entitled An Offering, 6 Years, a Conjecture, which was on view as part of an installation at Participant Inc. from December 2018 to January 29, as part of an exhibition, which she was included with Virginia de Medeiros, entitled Journeys with the Initiated. The video component of the work, alongside the works on paper which I just showed prior, presented passageways through which to join McClodden in reflecting on the intersections of her personal spiritual practice and its relationship to the international ethnographic research on Shango. Taking and extending what might be conceived as a form of autoethnography, McClodden began to disrupt monolithic views around spiritual practice and Orisha devotion. A poignant meditation on the solitary quotidian aspects of ritual practice, the work presented a subtle but insistent rejoinder to the codifying tendencies of ethnographic study on African spirituality. Here I'd like to offer a critical term that immediately came to my mind when I first saw Tiona's work. I pray to the wrong God for you. Imojumora. Don't be intimidated by the diacritics. Nested in the context of art historian Roland Abiodun's assertion for the integration of African language, culture, and ontology into the study of art, this Yoruba word is literally translated as sensitivity to the need of a moment, ability to adapt and change without being formally told to do so, sense of propriety, and measure of consciousness. At its core, Imojumora is continuity and change in the creative process. According to Abiodun, Imojumora is not only a crucial factor in the adoption of new asha, that is techniques, materials, artistic practice, but also a means whereby the culture is managed to survive in new environments and under the difficult conditions of enslavement in the New World. For him, the inventiveness of the diaspora lies in its effective application of Imojumora through strategic substitutes and unending iterations of art and religion. By containing within it the seeds of creativity and ingenuity propagated by change, Imojumora challenges notions of Yoruba art being static and unchanging, and to me provides a conceptual thread for diasporic practice that is at its core dynamic and ever-moving. Importantly, engaged in systems of expression not subject to European paradigms of aesthetic appreciation and production. I also appreciate it as a theoretical buttress to art historian Robert Farris Thompson's situated approach of studying art in motion. To be sure, Thompson gave us a space to think about art histories not of static objects, but as danced art predicated on an interdisciplinary and intermodal criteria of fine form, which seems to be shared amongst makers of sculpture, music, and dance. Now, I'd like to return to the 1970s, not to play Fela again, but to acknowledge what Francophone scholars Bénédicte Savoy and Papin Ndiaye have recently noted. It was during the 70s that we last experienced such fervent calls for the restitution of African cultural heritage in West Africa, a current of material and aesthetic concern situated within the larger tides of Pan-Africanist, decolonial, and Black liberation movements. I note this because of our current political moment. In November 2018, a polemic report by Senegalese scholar and writer Felwine Sarr and French art historian Bénédicte Savoy was published, entitled The Restitution of African Cultural Heritage Toward a New Relational Ethics. Commissioned by the French President Emmanuel Macron and concerning the Musée du Quai Branly's 26 objects, mostly statues from the royal palaces of Abomey in the former capital of the Kingdom of Dahomey, current Benin, this report called for conditions to be put into place to allow for the temporary or definitive restitution of African cultural heritage to the continent, with an eye towards a larger philosophical and political decolonial project. In thinking about Tiona McClodden's engagement with a specific element of Yoruba sculptural work, the Egbeni Shango Shrine in Ibadan, Oyo State, Nigeria, and its various screen posts, I find it prescient to note Sarr and Savoy's call for restitution as more than a single exploration of the past, but rather a question of building bridges for future equitable relations. To this topic, McClodden has said, the only way to even start the restitution conversation is as a reparative project around knowledge. You can't just get this knowledge with a degree. It is within this terrain, and with relation to these issues, that Tiona Nekkia McClodden's work, I Prayed to the Wrong God for You, operates. To me, the piece is a work of political and spatial intervention, a work that insists on the inextricable relationship between aesthetic and spiritual work, and a piece that is insistent on healing and repair. So with that, I'm going to invite Tiona to join me up here, and we'll have a chat.
Hello.
me not having, you know what, we've talked. I know. The questions that I had are not here, but I have them.
Get them right quick.
No, it's okay,
Here.
don't worry. We've had this conversation, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, here, I have the mic now. This is the third of a number of sustained conversations. The first was in April 2019 on the 16th. The second was November 20th, 2019, and the third is today. So the first was in your studio in Philadelphia, and I was, you know, months ahead, because we're both planners, saying, okay, when do you have time? We can sit together, we have like a few hours. And you basically showed me this work, and the top of my head kind of fell off. And it was unbelievable, and I remember asking you a number of questions, just like, one, how did you get to Lagos? And I didn't know. How did you get to Ibadan? Like, this is unbelievable. This is so dynamic and multimodal. And also, like, what does it mean to show this work in the Whitney? So that was really important. And then the second was within the context of Kelly Jones's class, which I thought was really important, just to think about your work in relationship to a number of amazing artists that she was teaching that semester in the history of African diasporic art practice. And then today, with all of you in the very museum where the work was housed. So I think, I mean, we can start just from title. I prayed to the wrong God for you. Like, why that? How did we get there? What were you thinking about?
Yeah. It's something that it keeps coming up in my life. First time, the iteration of it was like, you know, my father, who's a hyper religious man, coming to me and being very much like in this, it was what I now understand, this moment of like intellectual pureness that he couldn't handle, and being like, oh, you don't believe in me, you don't believe in God. And I was like, you know, I pray, you know, it's kind of like that kind of a saying, pray to the wrong God for you. Like, this is not for you. This is like for me. So that was like one moment. And then another time it happened like 2017 in regards to a lover, actually. Like, I was just like, literally it became more specific because at that point I understood the Orisha engagement. And I was like, oh God, I played to the wrong God for you. Because the energy was just not... I literally said it like, I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And it was really, it was so specific because it was literally Oshu versus Oya. So I was like, oh, no, this ain't the one that I was supposed to give the thing to, because it's not what I can handle. But it became this thing. I was very interested in it being this term that is like both personal and direct and biographical, but also this like ominous thing of like, you know, what this moment was for me. The declaration was, you know, in seeing all this is the work that it takes to kind of deal with the answer of that. Like, you know, if, you know, or a declaration of it, it's like all this work is the other side of that. And I was very aware of what my positionality would be as a Black practitioner who's participating in the Biennial. This big thing that is supposed to represent, you know, some of the best artists in America at the moment. And I was very, very aware also of the 400th year anniversary of the first enslaved Africans to the country. And I'm like, if people are looking at me and I have a platform in title, it needs to be so like clear about like what this is for me before I put the work in, you know, so.
I mean, and I guess going from just that conceptual kind of foundation, also materially, how did you do this? I mean, right, so we have sculptural elements, we have elements that are based on documentation, we have, I mean, I would say like the making of the installation is in and of itself is something that is unbelievable. Just walk us through also, I mean, the large range geographically of spaces that you're touching on too. So this is a dynamic work from a formal perspective, but also conceptually
also spiritually, for you to be bringing a research-based practice and also offering a part of your spiritual practice? Like,
yeah, I mean, I want to run it back to like how I dealt when you came to the studio, because like Remy came to the studio. Yeah, Remy came to my studio right the day. It just happened to be like the day after I turned in the files for the project, video files, and I had been working in the usual fashion of like not telling people what I'm doing, but in this case it was just like I was like treating everybody like they were the feds. I was just like, this is too crazy. Like, when people came to the studio, I would hide the work. It was really intense, and so I had already pre-selected Remy to be this person that I kind of dumped this work on, because I felt like she's the only person I could talk about it with, you know, just because of, you know, who she is, the scholarship that she's producing, the work that she's done. And so when she showed up ready for like a regular studio visit, I was like, so, you know, look at this. And I ran through the entire.
Then you left me. And
I left her. I was like, you know, this is the interview that's about to drop. I was like looking real crazy. Like,
then I was looking real crazy too.
Yeah, and I was like, yeah, just read this. It was like the art form piece that was about to come out. And then I had came back and I was like looking like this, and Remy was like, "Why do you think the Whitney even deserves it?"
You're gonna call me up, but literally I said that. Yeah.
Yeah. It was, but it was a big moment because all of the things that you are touching on started to allow me to actually have the first articulation during the entire process of what have I done, right? Like, this process of making the work was very much dealing with a certain energy and power, and a kind of directive that was like running through me at such an aggressive rate that everything else, like the timeline that everybody else was on, didn't even exist to me. Like, you know, it was like deadline, turn in the files. Before this, I have to do these things. This is what I have to do. The work starts from a reading that occurs on May 23rd, 2018. I go to see my Baba, and I just had like 3 back-to-back shows in New York, and I'm like completely burnt out. Go see him, and he tells me, you have to do work with Shango. And I immediately, before he even explained like what that meant, I knew what it was, because I'm a child of Ogun, and Ogun and Shango don't even get along. Primarily because Ogun is like someone who's like kind of pushed towards the forest engagement, very quiet, works tirelessly, all this other stuff. And Shango's like always in the front, just like, you know, giving it up, telling everything before it happens, all this kind of shit. And so I understood it as, you know, when you get that kind of like thing that just comes up, it's not like a ask. It means that you are depleted of this thing. And so at that point, I was also like kind of planning this escape from the art world. I was like, this shit is crazy. When they like you too much, and I don't know how to deal with it. And he was like, no, you actually have to deal with the front-facing element that you have never had to deal with as a behind-the-scene kind of like person. And so I kind of took the directive, you know, outside of the personal stuff that I had to do that's part of the practice as a priestess. Then there was this thing that came up that was about work. So what does it mean to do work for an Orisha, right? Like, what does it mean, like for me, within my art practice, why do I separate the art practice from the religious practice? Like, what is this thing? And immediately, you know, I had a chance to accept the residency at Skowhegan, which was still on the table at that time, because I was just so like, I don't know, like I didn't know what that was. And then went there and I was like, oh, this is really crazy. And I started this work there. You know, this work starts August. I had decided that I wanted to make Shango's tools. And the way that it would be made is through a certain kind of back and forth kind of divination recourse of like, this is what I'm going to do. Ask Shango is okay. Is this correct? So certain things that come up that I can like kind of touch on that are very important is that the red towel is like an object, because my Baba at one point says, when you do this work, it has to be on red. And I was like, I don't like what you talking about, you know.
But also thinking right about red for Shango.
Yeah. Shango's colors are red and white. Shango has 6 tools. The wood is cedar wood, is very particular. So the cutting of the tree was very particular because I wanted to deal with something that was like, this kind of mutt in terms of its genealogy, just as much as I see it myself as African American. So a cedar fir, something that's like kind of been infested in a way, or crossed. And so then it became this local-based kind of engagement. The tools, how do they become from this like this American context? How do they become an African object or a diasporic object? So taking them to Havana, was a big deal. It was just kind of like imperative because it was my 6th year. Yeah, it was a 6-year-old in terms of the practice. And so it was the first time I returned back to Havana where I was initiated. So this work actually at this, at that slide was me like finishing so that it exits a American into this like diasporic object. And then Nigeria was by chance. I went to Baba and I was like, yeah, so I'm going to, Salvador Bahia. I'm going to like, present the tools there. And he was like, nah, you got to go to Oyo State. And I was like, Oyo State is in Nigeria. I was like, what are you talking about? And he was like, no, he's like, Shango, it's very strong, right? And I was like, understood, Oyo State, birthplace of Shango. The Orisha are flesh and body gods, so they have birthplaces. And then Ibadan, University Ibadan came up because I'm like, Chinua Achebe, all those like scholars, I knew where they came from. And so I booked a flight without telling anybody.
Yeah. I was like, wow.
And flew to Nigeria. Yeah, Lagos. And got a hotel that was close enough for me to walk to the airport if anything went down. And got a driver through the airport. It was like a 5-star hotel or something. And that driver drove me to Ibadan and then drove me around. I tried to film there, but I was snuffed out because I had a leather jacket. They thought I was a singer or something, so it got hectic. But then I went to this shrine. I had the document that said that, I was interested in just presenting the tools to the land, right? Because that was like, ideally, take the tools, present them to the land. I also had a document that was an article that documented the 100 years of this particular shrine at the Agbini Shango Shrine in Ibadan. I didn't think it no longer existed. I was like, this is probably gone. So I tell and show the driver the document, and he ends up taking me to the market. And so I'm so ignorant that I think the market is like a flea market. It's like big as Brooklyn, like itself, or big as Philly. Yeah. And so then he drove me there, and then we got to get out and walk, and that's how I get to the shrine. That's not planned. So it's by chance, and then we have to exit really quickly for reasons I won't even say. But, it was very important that I think the tools, I was able to present the tools at the Shango Shrine because the prayer that I put up was very much around care. Like, can I be okay in this? And the in this is not the work, but like this practice, like of trying to do these things. So that's kind of how it got done. It wasn't any like kind of method to the madness of it, really. It was like really just following myself for once, following this like intuitive thing, but also being very much led by this like, dominant character, which is Shango.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really struck by the question of what it means to do work, right? Spiritual work, but also this artistic practice is a type of care, a type of work that you take so seriously. And, that stands in all that you've done in years leading up to this work, and of course surpassing and going on to the future. But I'm also struck just in thinking about like the elements of this installation that are so rigorous in the filmic language, but also somewhat different from what you had done before. So I'm curious for you what it meant to go through this practice, thinking just in terms of the process of constructing the tools, thinking about the routes you're going to triangulate, but also the filmic element. I mean, what did it mean for you to be setting up these cameras around yourself throughout the process, but also editing and thinking about departures in your formal vocabulary before?
Yeah, I mean, I basically vomited up a dormant knowledge of film history. It's my first thing of coming out, trying to be a formal filmmaker and being like, oh no, the business is nasty. So I was interested in composition. I was like, this has to be shot by myself. I also really had to pull out the ethnographic language because that's what, you know, when you're really trying to get into documentary filmmaking, that's just what you have to look at if you want to understand what you don't want to do, especially with Black bodies. And so I looked at those films and I was looking at what they did, also photographs. I was very informed by photography. So like looking at Pierre Verger's work was really, really important as an ethnographer that I respect. And trying to figure out still how to do something that is a little different. But then there's just like, you know, the language, there's something that's always set up that's, you know, I think in dialogue with each other, especially thinking about the objects. The objects have these like characterizations to them. I needed the helmet to be repetitive because it's like my pal. There is like my Wilson from Castaway. You know, and it's like this real intimate engagement that I like kind of needed to do what I need to do because all rituals require a witness. So I needed a witness. And it couldn't be a person. I wasn't about to drag my Baba all over the world for this. So those things kind of collapsed into each other. I was like able to really kind of push the elements of thinking about sculpture and dwell in a place formally that was very exciting before I had to think about the way that it would exist in space. Because that was not the dominant idea in my head, I could say that for sure. In thinking about this, I really was thinking about how do I create a certain kind of iconography. It doesn't have a lot of talking. Most of my films don't. It's really about reading an image. So I had to understand what each screen would do with the 3 screens in interaction with the others. But really being in the moment, being present, and forgetting about the camera most times because I'm not really, I don't consider myself a performer. Whenever I'm in the shot, it's a document.
Yeah, we had this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this is a documentation of ritual. This
Yeah.
is not performance, right?
Yeah, not at all. Yeah, to the point of like, you know, there's a lot of failure in this. There's a lot of failure. You know, I think sometimes the failure, then editing, right? Editing everything myself. I edited it all myself. I colored it all myself, all that stuff. That's when you start to write, right? So I allowed myself to have my own, like I have a very experience that's in it, and the camera just becomes like this like weird little thing. I was more concerned about my helmet than the camera at times, which was very, very strange, but it was necessary. And then editing is the writing. Okay, let's put these things up next to each other and let's see how they talk to each other. And then finally, the installation becomes a tool that actually can talk back to me. So that's why it's like, you know, set up the way it was.
Yeah, that's the next question. I mean, the construction of the installation itself, the concept of the infinite loop, right? Thinking about, for you, right, in process, it's clear this is subsidiary, right, the idea of the documentation, but then also the making of the installation is something that will continually challenge a viewer, right, to continually walk around. Can you tell us a little bit about what kinds of decisions were coming into that?
Well, it was, you know, I have to give a shout out to, you know, this experience of being in the Biennial as, you know, artist that's coming in who struggled first and foremost, like if they're here in a room, to the people who are behind the tech team. One big shout out to Jane Panetta, who worked with me very closely on this, and the exhibition design team, because it's like you come in and it ends up becoming a bit of a collaboration. I had a very strong idea. I was like, this is going to be like Choose Your Adventure. You know, those are my favorite kind of books as a kid. I was like, it's not going to be, you know, like the running time is going to, and I'm not showing that. It's going to be something that has to deal with the space. So I came in originally with something where it's like these 3 screens that would be faced. Then the renders through the conversations, like, you know, Jane pushed me and she's like, we can do this. And this is like a kind of like, you know, thinking in consideration because of the space, the gallery space, because I specifically requested to be in a gallery despite being affected by everything and not to be in the room. So that became something that pushed me towards like ideas of return. And one of the things that really came up for me was Mecca, you know, and also putting that in relationship to the use of the rotunda, the column that's in use within Candomblé, where you, as a practitioner in ceremony, you circle. You circle until you fall into possession or to a certain kind of submission, to then be able to like pass pass on or let the Orisha pass through, or the Egun, etc. And so I was like, that movement is something that was interesting. It would also allow people to see whatever they wanted to see. You know, it wasn't about seeing the whole thing. Some people went really far and stayed like the whole day and did it. But if you saw 5 minutes, it's the film. If you saw like 3 hours, it's the film. You know, that's kind of like was my logic. But it was really about movement and gaze, you know, and something, again, that could talk to me. Whenever I went to the gallery, it told me something different, based on the, you know, the fact that the top is not, the top is synced, the bottom is not. So you're guaranteed something different every time. And that was really important for it to kind of like not take up too much space, but also like blend in into a gallery space, because I'm trying to speak to also like, you know, film and video folks with this, you know, about installation, about taking chances with like interference. It's something that's supposed to be interfered. You know, you're not supposed to see everything at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, for me also the importance of your approach to this work lasted beyond, right, the production, the construction of the installation, but also that you took so much time to walk people through the space throughout the course of the biennial. Can you talk about like what that meant for you, the decisions you made, or what kinds of encounters that generated, and also the stakes of this work being in this fantastic institution, but also it's a different type and like actually a phenomenal institution, but it's a work that is unexpected, right? And I think something that Scott had mentioned that I thought was really beautifully put is how brave it is to show this kind of work right now, right?
I mean, it's like it's brave, but it's like there's something there where I'm like, I push against it because I'm like, this is what it is. The thing is, like, it could be my body, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, this could be a representation of what I am in America. So I don't think it's exceptional. I think this is like, you know, if my guts are put out, this is what it is, you know? Like, if my heart is here, this is what it is, but this is me. This show, the Biennial, the way it's set up is like something that starts the first like painful process of how, you know, I think art starts to be divorced from the artist, you know? And I mean, there's a lot of folks, and this is like, you know, not a diss, there's people who, you know, will put forth images but not put forth themselves, which is fine, and it kind of, I think sometimes it's very healthy. But because of this, the political time that I had already taken besides the other stuff that was happening, you know, I wanted to kind of like kind of slap people over the face, like, don't ever think that I would never do what I need to do. You know, like, because the expectation is you're going to come and you're going to perform. And I'm like, I'm going to come and stay on track with what my life is at this point. So there's something biographical here before it is like these things. And it will be uncomfortable. It'll be uncomfortable. You know, I had like, you know, practitioners were the coolest with me because that's who I was trying to get to. I was just like, I don't want them to see that I'm going to do this in half step. They can't think that I'm skipping steps or that I'm like, you know, out here for play. The people, you know, I had like, you know, I don't know. I mean, there's a couple of us who have dealt with some weird stuff during that time, but I had more Christian, you know, Christian-based folks who were like, I don't understand. I'm like, I'm not about to do this. Weird interactions from folks like that. What do you mean, you know, by this? And I'm like, you know, it's like what I said. I think the other thing was so interesting about being able to kind of slow down what was like happening at the time. The piece to me like slowed people down a bit and made them reconsider video and film practice. That's something that kept coming up. They're like, well, I can look at it if it's like this, you know? And I was like, well, that's really cool because, I mean, institutionally, like, I think for my fellow film and video makers or installation makers, you want to kind of challenge and show that you can take up that space, you know, and it can work. But it was, you know, overall, I think it was something that put me very much by myself. You know, I think in the larger group, things, it was, you know, I think the way that it was handled over with the press and things was very interesting. You know, they were like, she's on a spiritual journey. Like, okay, you know, like
spiritual life.
Yeah, it was just like some of the things you could see the failures of the writers, you know, like, or who was writing. It was very, you know, made very explicit. But then on this other hand, I had like folks who stepped up and who felt like, I think they had a chance to talk about something because they could see what it was. And that was very powerful for me to have that engagement, because I like thinking with people across forums. So that was like, what are you going to tell me about? And that really excited me. So I learned a lot from this piece.
Yeah. I mean, there was something beautiful in one of our conversations and in reading about how you were thinking about this work. But, the process of you, right, encountering the Agbeni shrine in Ibadan, Nigeria, and you talking about discovering the posts, right? So there are these posts that are in this specific shrine, but the posts that exist in the Nigerian context are not the original posts, right? So the original posts that have been carved are now in the DIA, right, the Detroit Institute of Art. And you talked a little bit about the relationship between those two objects as one that's one of ancestor, right, of those who are living and who have passed. And I found that so poetic and beautiful, but I was wondering if you could just share a little bit more about what that relationship and seeing those objects meant for you.
Yeah, I mean, those objects are presented in this kind of form based on the document that I have, this documentation, and it shows these pieces are now in the DIA. And I was like, but, kind of had it, and, in my head and put it away. When I got to the actual shrine, I could see the pieces, like, there's some pieces that are like originals, and then these ones that are quote unquote copies. And I immediately had this like big moment by myself, because they let me go in there and just have this moment by myself. And I was like, what are the ones in the museum? Like, I was like, they're not, that's when that moment was like, oh, they're the ancestors. These are the ones that are on. The work that I'm doing is the work that a practitioner is to do. You are supposed to continue to make these objects. That was the thing, the biggest lesson is that, did I have some internalized, like, latent art historical, like, idea around like primitive art? Like, what is that? No. Like, so this is what you're actually supposed to do. So this is what these folks do, because those things are needed for the ceremony, right? And so it brought me to that place of really understanding. I was like, so then do I need to go and talk to the objects in DIA, which I plan to in Detroit, and say, this is what I did, and this is what is still happening. You're still extended, you can be okay. We have a concept called elevation. When someone passes, if they didn't get their, if they have regrets, they can cause you trouble. And you have to do these things so you could tell them it's okay, you can go. And I think objects work in that way. And I think they still need to be talked to. They're still very much valid and on, but they are the ancestor of the actual object that's still alive. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to run out because I really wanted this not to be a lot of me talking, but there is more. I want to say thank you to Jane and Rue, for coming and doing that really, really interesting studio visit, for giving me an opportunity. And I understand like how difficult it was for all of us to like be a part of this show at the time for various reasons. So I really appreciate all the requests and the thoughtfulness. It felt like it was like me in the show. And I know you had like 100 other people that you had to engage with, artists just alone. And, this award came at such a strange time. One, because I didn't really know what it was. So when, Scott called me And he was like, the jury has met. I was just like, what? Like, who's the jury? And I was like, this language is. But it was like, it was so helpful for me to hear what he said about the jury saying about my work. And it wasn't just the, the piece in the show. And it made me feel very seen for one of the first times, because I do so much, stuff, but mentioning my writing, mentioning the curatorial stuff, I felt like it wasn't all in vain or all separated in the way that sometimes it exists in my head. And I think in that spirit, this is the way that, I wanted to close out this evening by, also thanking the Bucksbaum family for structuring an award that allows someone who's like maybe taking these kind of chances. Because this was this work in the show was a big chance for me. It was a chance to have a certain kind of financial support to get off something that, is very ambitious and even scary to me. But it's also something, that is giving me the courage, but also financial support to really push forward on more work. So I wanted to close out the show with work that I have coming up and do something that I usually don't do, because I don't ever show anything until it's finished. But this stuff is like, I'm editing now. Stuff is being sent to be scored and all that. So 2 projects that I wanted to highlight. I wanted to highlight one work. The first work that you'll see is called The Trace of an Implied Presence. That's going to open at the BAM Rudin Galleries, Family Galleries, April 1st, very fast. It's curated by Larry. And I am exploring an archive, the Dance Black America archive, program that was put together by Mickey Shepard, 1983. Looked at over 300 years of Black dance. And it gave me an opportunity to do something that I've never done or had the opportunity to do, is bring someone back to see the archive that they've made. And with Mickey's permission, I'm creating an addendum of sorts to Dance Black America that features a project that I did in 2018 as a Magnum Fellow called the Philly Bop, where I document myself learning the national dance of Philadelphia called the Philly Bop. The origins are from the bop and the refusal of Black American dancers from being able to dance on American Bandstand. So they had to dance in cabarets and like kind of these juke joints, and they created this dance that's at risk of dying. So this again opens in BAM. So I'm going to play a clip and then introduce another project.
You have been part of a community and you have made this incredible contribution, and we're going to celebrate you. And you have a voice at a major institution, And so I think for many people, and they.
1, 2, 3, 5. So I'm going to talk over it a little bit. So what you're seeing is a 3-channel installation piece. It features Mickey Shepard, the Rod Rogers Dance Company, and Jolinda D. Lewis, who wrote in '83 for the catalog. I go back and I talk to them and I look at and see who is left dancing, which choreographers have companies. And then you'll see in the middle images to kind of creative language, a connective language of Black dance and language in the body. And then profiles on the dancers who do and maintain the Philly Bop, which is a dance that's kind of dying because it's a social dance. And it requires like a 6-step count learn. And the man who's dancing right now before it cuts off is Otis Givens. He's the first Black man to dance on American Bandstand. The next project, something I've been working on for a very long time, is a continuation of my Be Alarmed series. Be Alarmed, the Black Americana epic. This is Movement 3, the Triple Deities, shot entirely in North Philadelphia, which takes a look at the art song form of song that connects or creates a collaboration between poet and composer. In this case, I'm really interested in looking at the art song as a kind of stealth form of activism that exists within a form that can be seen as conservative, which is classical music. Focuses on a piece called Song to the Dark Virgin, which is a poem that was written by Langston Hughes that was turned into a composition by Florence B. Price, the first African-American woman to have her work performed by a symphonic orchestra. And then it was performed by Marian Anderson, where it became a national hit. So in a continuation, I'm trying to match up elements of my family's spiritual and just historical biography with these larger African-American events to create a new language and iconography of what Americana or Black Americana can be.
Would that I were jewel, a shattered jewel, that all my shining brilliance might fall at thy feet, thou dark one. Would that I were a garment, a shimmering silken garment, that all my folds might wrap about thy body, absorb thy body, hold and hide thy body, thou dark one. Would that I were a flame, but one sharp leaping flame to annihilate thy body, thou dark one.
So Be Alarm is a, thank you. Be Alarm is a four-part series that tells an epic film of my construction that was written back in 2010. And I've been hopping across movements as I have resources to produce the work. This is supported by the Pew Foundation, which is why it's able to be kind of produced at the scale that it is. It's multi-channel work with objects in the same fashion as the first movement. And also features, it's going to feature an original score by Courtney Bryan with a live performance component where she plays the actual score with a singer, Janina Burnett, who's going to perform a kind of abstraction of Florence's piece, as well as like thinking about larger elements that form her kind of like conceptual framework for her compositions. Features Danielle Detweiler and Ash Tai, who I've been continually collaborating with. So it's really, really important for me to share, I think, clips from this. Because I'm able to now like kind of present and return to the project that brought me to the art world. This work is a way for me to deal with some of the frustrations of form. Films to me are not something that I want to ever present in theaters ever again. I'm interested in films that people can walk around and see. And so this film is told through the use of trailer scenes, objects, sound, film stills, and film posters with minimal dialogue. So that's it. That's all I got. Thank y'all for coming out. And I'm looking forward to sharing this work with you.